yet. Do you know what I mean? I don't think he's finished. We don't just come for the worship and then sit for half an hour and that's it. I really feel like God's got more to speak to us this morning. So Sam has started our 5-part series. So I'm finishing it off this morning about you in 5 years. So we've looked at who we want to be, why we want to change, how we do it, when to make changes, and today I'm going to talk about what if. What if you've got a plan, you had a dream, but it's not quite going to plan, or it's not quite going as you thought it would, or if God, maybe there's a sudden grief, or a change in circumstances, or a loss of a job, or something that really just put you off, and you're not sure, it's not going quite as well as you thought it would. So that's what I'm going to be talking about this morning. So if we open our Bibles, it's a quick test to see who's brought theirs. I'm not sure if Millie's on a Facebook or on a phone. So Luke 10, we're going to, verse 38, and it's the story of Mary and Martha. I spoke to Nikki this morning I said I was doing Mary and Martha, and she was excited. She said it's one of her favourite stories, so I've done it just for her. Luke 10, verse 38 to 42. So it says, Jesus visits Martha and Mary. As Jesus and the disciples continued on their way to Jerusalem, they came to a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. Her sister Mary sat at the Lord's feet, listening to what he taught. But Martha was distracted by the big dinner she was preparing. She came to Jesus and said, "Lord, doesn't it seem unfair to you that my sister just sits here while I do all the work?" I don't know if anyone else has that feeling in this room. Maybe it's your husband or wife, maybe not, it's a sister. So, "Lord, doesn't it seem unfair to you that my sister just sits here while I do all the work? Tell her to come and help me." But the Lord said to her, "My dear Martha, you are worried and upset over all these details. There is only one thing worth being concerned about. Mary has discovered it, and it will not be taken away from her." So the last verse is, there is one thing worth being concerned about. Mary has discovered it, and it will not be taken away. So what is it that Jesus is talking about? What is it that Mary has discovered? So Mary is sat there listening to Jesus. She's close to Jesus, whilst Martha is in the kitchen preparing the dinner. She sounds a bit like when your brothers and sisters and you run to your mum and you're like, "Mum, tell her off for hitting me." Martha sounds a bit like that in this story. She's sort of saying, "Lord, can you tell Mary off for sitting at the foot?" So Martha thinks she's doing the right thing. She thinks she's the one in the right in this story. She thinks to work hard and to prepare the food is what Jesus wanted her to be doing. But Jesus actually flips it on her head here and says, "Well, no, because my dear Martha, you are worried and upset over all these details, but there is only one thing worth being concerned about, and Mary has discovered it." So Jesus is saying, actually, it's more important to listen into Jesus, to focus on Jesus and our relationship with Jesus, rather than the things that we're doing, rather than things that we're busy doing instead of connecting with God. So, for the context of Mary and Martha, in those days, disciples, so Jesus was a rabbi, he was a teacher, so in those days, women weren't really allowed to be disciples. They wouldn't really follow rabbis around. It would just be men. So the fact here that Mary and Martha are following Jesus around, that is unusual in itself. And then in those days, so to sit at the foot of a disciple, a rabbi, would say that you're their disciple. So you would follow them round, and wherever they go, you'd sit at the foot with them. So what Mary's doing here is saying, "Jesus, I'm your disciple. I want to learn from you. I want to follow you." So just as a side note, Jesus elevates women in the Bible. Jesus he hangs around with women. Mary, Martha, disciples of women. He gives value to women. That's just nothing to do with the story. Just thought it was interesting to point out. But when I was looking at the story, I was just wondering, who am I in the story? So I was trying to think about what my life is like, and I was thinking, am I Mary or am I Martha? I think sometimes I do see myself like a bit of a Martha. I think, not Marta, a Martha. I focus on what I'm doing. So we can be so busy thinking, what does God want me to do? That I'm going, okay, yeah, have I done really well in youth this week? Have I prepared a good Bible study? Have I prayed enough? That's busy doing things like Martha was in the kitchen. And actually that's sort of selfish of me. It's sort of prideful to be always concerned with what I'm doing. So to be sat there and going, I've done this and I've done that, so therefore Jesus must be pleased with me, or therefore I'm in the right just because I'm busy doing something, isn't actually right. And that's sometimes a difficulty for me as I work here in the church. Sometimes you can get busy doing things for God, but not actually spend time with God. So you might sit down in the morning and start praying, and then you think, oh, I've got to prepare a study for the kids, or we've got a purpose group. And sometimes I wonder whether we miss the presence of God because we're so focused on something else. So maybe sometimes we focus as a result, we focus on the circumstances instead of the solution. So if we're too busy looking at what's going on, we might miss what God's saying as a solution. He might have a solution to our problems. But I think, for me, the most challenging thing is that actually I could miss the presence of God by being busy doing something. And I was reading this story and I thought, wow, how many times have I missed something that God wanted to do in my life, or God wanted to say to me, because I was too busy? I think, isn't it ironic how it says in the story, Martha is the one that invites Jesus to the house. So Martha goes out to Jesus and says, come into my house, and then she doesn't spend time with him. I think that's challenging for me. I think that's sometimes what I do. I invite Jesus, I say, I'm going to pray, I'm going to read my Bible, which is effectively inviting Jesus in, but I don't actually spend time with him. Or I say I've invited Jesus into my life, and then I don't spend time to get to know him for that relationship. For me, that's scary, to think that, Martha is so excited to see Jesus. She invites him in, but what she thinks is what Jesus wants is to be treated amazingly with this feast. But actually what Jesus is saying is, Mary is better because she sat at my feet listening to me. That's the better position to be in. So I think for some of us today, that might be actually, you don't need to do anything. You don't need to strive. You don't need to work hard. You just need to sit at the feet of Jesus. And that's really what we're doing. In the worship, I just felt that there was a piece of God just taking away that work, taking away that striving, taking away that Martha mentality that we have as Christians, that we don't necessarily know we're doing it. We don't necessarily know we're being busy. I think sometimes it can be deceptive. We think we're doing amazing things. And yes, we might be doing great things, but it can distract us from the great things that Jesus wants to do. So what do we do if we're distracted? So if we become distracted by what's going on in life, or our circumstances, or we had that dream, but it's not going right, or we've had a difficult week, what do we do? And for me, I had this illustration of my mum. So anytime we go away on a trip, so we put the music on and we're listening away, and I'm singing along. Millie will test this. My mum and dad singing along, and then someone says something, and when the words, someone said, "Oh, Mum," and she turns the music down. She turns it off. And I'm like, no, I want to speak to you and sing along. I don't know if that's a generational thing. But my mum, she can't listen to the music and speak to me. So for me it's frustrating, but actually it's a good picture of maybe what we need to do. We're going a lot, or if you think about it, with a sat-nav, if you know where you're going, the music's on, you're not concentrating on the sat-nav, you don't need to concentrate, you're singing along, and then someone goes, where do we go next? And then naturally just turn the music down to concentrate on the sat-nav. Because we can't do two things at once. We're not good at multitasking. I always get frustrated at my mum for doing that. But actually, that's amazing. She's just giving her time to me. She's turned the volume down to focus solely on me. Because she says otherwise, she can't hear me. You know, I think, and that's what we do, we get distracted, but so to overcome the distraction, we need to remove them. So we need to remove the distractions. What is getting in the way of you coming to Jesus? What is getting in the way of you spending time with God? What is getting in the way of that relationship? Because, like my mum, we need to turn the music off, or we need to get in the same room as Jesus. You know, if Millie was trying to call my name, if I'm in the kitchen and the kettle's on, the kettle's boiling, and Millie's trying to talk to me from the other room, I can't hear her. But that's not because she's not speaking loud enough, it's because I'm not close enough. So actually, Millie might be shouting pretty loudly to me in the other room, going, Simon, but if I'm in the kitchen, cooking, or, no, that's normally Millie's job. She's better than me than I am, so it's not being like that. So, yes, so if I'm in the kitchen, and I can't physically hear her, because I'm too far away. It's nothing to do with how loud they're speaking. And maybe that's Jesus trying to tell us something this morning. Jesus is trying to speak to you, but you're too far away. You're distracted. And that's what Jesus is saying, to come back. So to be like Mary, we must choose it. We must choose to listen. Choose to be the one that sits down. Choose to be the Mary, not the Martha. So what does choose mean? Some definitions are to decide on a course of action, or pick out something as being the best or most appropriate of two or more alternatives, or to select from a number of possibilities. But my favourite definition is to pick by preference. So the preference. So Jesus isn't necessarily saying here that Martha was doing completely the wrong thing. Or it's not necessarily saying here that Mary is really lazy because she's just sat there. That's not necessarily the thing, it's the preference. So Mary's preference is to spend time with Jesus. So the question is for us, when times are difficult, when we are struggling, maybe this week we've had a difficult week, what is our preference? What are we prioritising? Are we focusing or prioritising the problem or the situation or the fear or the things that have happened that have gone wrong? Or is our preference to spend time with Jesus? Because if our priorities aren't Jesus, if our preferences are other things, they will let you down. They are not perfect like Jesus. They do not know every day of our life before we live it like Jesus does. They do not have the power in themselves to change our situation. So maybe, sometimes we struggle in a situation, and the first person we go to is our friend. Or the first person I'd go to is probably Millie, and then maybe my mum. But why is it not Jesus that I go to first? Why is he not my preference? And for me, that's a massive question. Why is it not the priority in our lives? Because storms will come. Like, being a Christian does not say, our trials and tribulations will all go, we'll have an easy life, we can all be happy and have parties every day. That's not what God even promises in the Bible. He says you will have troubles, but do not fear, I have overcome the world. So, is Jesus your preference? Is he your priority? Because sometimes I feel like the more time you give to something, the more power it has over you. So the more time I focus on that negative thing that's happening, the more power it has over me. Because I'm giving it time, I'm giving it thought. And if it just continues in your mind, or if it builds up. So don't give it time. Give it to Jesus. So in the Message version, it says that Mary was hanging on every word Jesus said. So hanging on every word that he said. And if I think about my life, that challenged me. I don't think I hang on every word Jesus says. I think it's probably the case that I miss I probably get 1 in 10 words that Jesus says. We probably can't hear from him well. And as I said previously, it's probably not because he's not speaking or he's not there. It's that we're not listening. So what if life isn't going to plan? Does this mean God doesn't care? Does this mean that he's not faithful or trustworthy? Which, let's all be honest in this room, we have those doubts. We have those questions. And if our faith is not strong in Jesus, the winds will come and we will doubt and we will be fearful and we will worry. And actually, that can change our opinion of Jesus. If we don't know someone and something happens and we hear about them, that negatively affects our opinion of them. Whereas if someone told me that something happened and I know the person, I know it wouldn't, no, that's definitely not them, because I know it. So if we don't know God, we start to doubt. But Psalm 145, verse 13 says, "Your kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and your dominion endures through all generations. The Lord is faithful to all his promises, and loving toward all he has made." I feel like maybe someone needs to hear that again. The Lord is faithful to all his promises, and loving towards all he has made. So all of us are being made in the image of God. God has created all of us. So he's faithful to all his promises, and he's loving towards all he has made. He's not loving to the ones that were cooking a nice dinner. He was not loving to the ones that worked hard. He's not just loving to the ones that strive. He's loving to all he has made. And then the verse 14 says, "The Lord upholds all those who fall and lifts up all who are bowed down." So the Lord upholds us. So the Lord lifts us up. So when we're going through trials and tribulations, the Lord is the one that lifts us up. It won't, your family might help, friends might help, your wife, husband might help, but it's the Lord that lifts you up. And if you have people around you, they will lift you up in the Lord. They will help you be strong in the Lord. So the Lord lifts up all who are bowed down. So that means that we have to bow down, which in essence is saying, God, you are Lord over all. God, I don't know what's going on, but I am smaller than you. These circumstances are smaller than you. So all these things that you came in with this morning, they're smaller than God. I feel like we don't actually believe that. I feel like we're nodding and agreeing, but I don't actually think we believe that truly. Your circumstances and your issues are smaller than the power of God. So God has power over every problem that you have. I think sometimes I'm giving advice to someone and I go, "Oh, God, of course he's going to do it. God's powerful, God's strong, it's supernatural, nothing's too problem for God." And then I have an issue and I go, "Oh, is God big enough to do it for me?" "Oh yeah, he's definitely going to do it for Graham because God loves everyone, God's powerful, but, well, maybe not for me." And that's what it's like for all of us. So, we've probably heard this a million times, 1,000 times. For some of us, it's a new thought. But we all need to hear it again. God is bigger than all your problems. So 2 things can happen when it isn't going well. 1, we either let circumstances dictate our thoughts and feelings, or we let our thoughts and feelings dictate our circumstance. So let's say it again. 1, we either let circumstances dictate our thoughts and feelings, or we let our thoughts and feelings dictate our circumstances. So there's 2 options really. If we're going through problems, we either let that affect our thoughts and feelings and produce negative results, or the trust that we have in the Lord, the power of God, we let the thoughts on God change those circumstances without being affected and without being tossed by the wind, without being up and down, without being fearful and afraid. But those times will come. And that's why, even if you're not going through a trial now, they will come. I know that isn't the most joyful, happy part of this preach, but they will come. And we need to be prepared. So before life gets out of hand for you, we must choose to spend that time with God. We must choose to surrender to him and to follow him and to give everything over to him. Worship him no matter what. I think sometimes bad things happen, and if we don't know God, we say, "Oh, why is God letting this happen?" Or "God's done this to me." That's not God's heart. The things that are out there that are going wrong is not God's heart for you. Yes, he may turn it to good. Yes, he turns all things for our good. But that does not mean that he brought it. For me, we just have to choose to surrender to him no matter what. No matter if we understand. We can train for the trial we are not yet in. If we prioritise Jesus now, if we deepen our relationship with him now, when the storm hits, and when we're going, God, I don't know, I don't understand, he is our preference still. And he is the thing we cling to. The only thing, the anchor. We were singing about the anchor. That's the thing that keeps us in the wind. When the wind and waves come, the only thing that keeps the boat is the anchor. But you can't see it. You can't see the anchor. That doesn't mean it's not there. I think sometimes we go, God, where are you in this situation? God, I literally cannot see you. But like an anchor, it does not mean that God's not there, just because things aren't going quite the way you want. So what if my plans aren't going, press into God. Circumstances will change. Have we continued listening to God? God might have given me a dream 5 years ago, and then he could tell me something different 3 years later. But if I'm not listening, I still think that dream 5 years ago is the right one for me. But I still feel like the thing that God told me 3 months ago is still the thing I'm supposed to be doing. But once he's spoken again, and you haven't heard him. I'm reminded just of Abraham when he took Isaac up to the mountain. God said, sacrifice your son on the mountain. So he takes him up there, and God speaks to him again and says, Abraham, I know you trust me with everything. You'd even trust me with your son. So God says, don't sacrifice him, I've got a lamb for you. But if Abraham wasn't listening the second time, he would have gone through with it. So Abraham heard correctly at the start, but then he was listening all the way through and he heard again. Otherwise he would be here listening. Oh yeah, that's a really odd thing to say, Jesus, but I'm going to do it. And then it would have gone through with it if he wasn't listening. So maybe that's something for us today. Maybe we have to press into God. We have to seek God in our circumstances. Let God bring the fire back to us that might be dwindling right now. We might have once been on fire for God, everything for Jesus, and then we've hit the rocks, or our boats hit the rocks. When I was a child in school, not that long ago, when you're in primary school, you sit cross-legged on the floor as close to the teacher as you can get. Why do they do that? So you can hear him, so you can listen. Why the disciples? I know it's surprising that I listened in school, and that's a surprise. Why do the disciples sit at the foot of the rabbi, close? So they can hear, so they can listen effectively. When you get to secondary school, you think you're really cool, like me I was, obviously. I sat at the back, chatting, distracted. How many times can you sit at the back, chat, and know what the teacher said? You can't. When the teacher calls you out, what will I just say? You can't tell them, because you can't physically hear. So, for me, what God's really put on my heart this morning is, I believe the difficulties come with this dream, with the what-ifs. When the dreams or visions don't match our circumstances, and therefore we can't understand. So we cannot understand God or what is happening based on our circumstances. For me, I think that's where the difficulty comes. We love to understand things. We love to know what's going on. We love to put God in a box and understand him in our minds. Our human minds, we put God in a box. But we can't understand everything. Otherwise he wouldn't be God. Let me just repeat that. We cannot understand everything. Otherwise he wouldn't be God. He would just be the same as us. And we try to put him in a box and say, God, I want to understand you. I'm going to do this when I understand why. Or I'm going to follow you when I understand everything about why this is going on, this problem's happened. That's not what we need to do. If we wait until we understand everything, we are denying God the opportunity to be supernatural. So you can see people, so all of us in here, if we believe in Jesus, that's supernatural. We believe that the Holy Spirit lives in us. So we believe that God lives in us. That is supernatural. So you don't have to understand everything to give your life to Jesus. I've probably been a Christian for 8 years, and I do not understand everything. I probably understand, 0.001% of what God's doing about the Bible, about everything. That doesn't mean I can't be a Christian. That doesn't mean I can't trust God. And that doesn't mean that God can't move in this room and in this situation. We can't understand God fully, otherwise he wouldn't be God. So Bill Johnson says, in order to have a peace that surpasses all understanding, you have to give up the right to understand. So let me say that again. Martin looks confused. In order to have a peace that surpasses all understanding, you have to give up your right to understand. So, we want a peace that stays no matter what the circumstances are. Is that right? So we want to have that peace in God no matter what comes my way. So to do that, I have to give up the right to understand what's going on. I have to lay my life down, give it up, give up the right to understand. Because otherwise, I'll always be going, God, why is this happening? Why is that happening? And maybe, for us, once we give it to God, he's going to move in the situation. I don't want to be able to understand everything of God. Otherwise, he wouldn't be mighty. Otherwise, he wouldn't be supernatural. Otherwise, he wouldn't be worth worshipping. If he was a human, he'd let you down. The only reason he's worth praising and worshipping is because he's supernatural, because he's perfect, because he's above our understanding. So we're sat here, God's probably speaking to about 2 billion people at the same time now. Let's just let that sink in. So our God right now is probably speaking to billions of people at the same time. He's probably healing millions of people around the world at the same time right now, whilst we're here in Cullen Valley. We cannot understand that. We reduce God to our comprehension because it makes us feel better about ourselves. It makes us feel more secure, being able to understand something that we give our lives to. But we can't. Stop trying to put God in a box. Stop trying to comprehend God completely. You can't. So that's what he's saying in this story. Jesus wants to impart knowledge. He wants to impart peace. He wants to impart joy in our lives. And to do that, we have to get to the foot. We have to kneel down and listen to Jesus. So what is he saying to you today? What is Jesus wanting you to do today? The things that we've come in this room with, the peace that's not there. It's been a really hard week. I can see it on some faces. It's been hard. It's rough. The last few years have been difficult. Just come. Come now to receive God. It really is as simple as that. So, have we got pain? Have we got fears, worries? Are we doubting God? Is this week really being like, God, are you actually real? And some of us, that might be a thought every day. We might not believe in Jesus. And I'm here to tell you this morning, he's 100% real. Our God is powerful. Our God is the healer. He heals people. He saves people's lives and he brings them to eternity. Because of Jesus, all we have to do is say, God, come into my life, and we get to go to heaven. That is something that we will never understand. Are you tired of trying to understand God? Sometimes our pride and our understanding restricts God's movement. Restricts God. He wants to move through me and through you. But sometimes if we try and understand him, we put him in a box. So this is the day that I think God is going to break chains in this room. This is the day that God's going to take away things that you've been carrying around. As Roger said, do we believe that? Have we come in here today going, God, you will transform my life today? Or have we gone, I'm coming on a Sunday because I have to? God is going to move this morning. You know, he moved in worship. God, I can feel the peace in this room from God. And that is what he wants to bring now. So, you know, what's that situation that you've been struggling with that you haven't given to God? What's that illness that you've continued with and you've accepted that has power over your life? Because today God wants to break that. He wants to break that power over your life. Because God is more powerful than our circumstances. That's what I was talking about earlier. God is more powerful than anything we're going through. So what I'm going to say is, if there's something that you need from God, if you want a miracle, if you want to heal that illness today, we're going to call you to the front and we're going to pray for you. So if there's anything that you want to, I'm just saying now, as Jesus did, come to the front now and just give your life to Jesus. Come closer to listen to him. And you know, it's only a literal thing. Come to this front. There's nothing special about this front bit. It's just God. I'm making that step to come closer to you. Well, I might be here. I'm coming closer to you. So if that's you, if you need God to speak to you today, I'm just going to say, come.